Welcome to the 221st episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Rachel Harper, the author of This Side of Providence. Stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Rachel Harper, author of the new novel, This Side of Providence. Harper's first novel, Brass Ankle Blues, was chosen as one of Borders' best original voices and selected as a Target Breakout Book. Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you having me.
Great. Well, can you read 2 or 3 pages from your new novel, This Side of Providence?
Yeah, I'd love to. I will read the first chapter, which is from the mother's point of view, and her name is Arcelia. Before they knock down the door, I run. I'm wearing flip-flops, men's pajama bottoms, and a tank top with no bra, my sunglasses on the top of my head. I grab my baby and tuck her under my arm like a purse. She's one of the few things I own, and unlike everything else in my possession, I never lost or broke her. I hear them enter the apartment. The front door cracks, their voices boom, but I'm gone before they catch me. Out the back window and down the alley before I know where I'm running to. Doctors always say I'm too skinny, but you'll never catch me with my hips stuck in no window, even them small ones they put in basements. And I can still outrun almost any man, even in sandals and with a baby in my arm and a dope habit that keeps me shooting almost 10 bags a day. My baby's 3 now, not a baby anymore, and if I put her down, she could run alongside me, but I hold her instead to keep her close to my body and to remind myself that I still have something to hold on to. Besides, what kind of mother lets a little girl run from the police? I don't know a lot of things, but I know that ain't right. Me, I'm always running. So quick my feet don't seem to touch the ground. I hear the sound, though, the slap of my sandals on the pavement as I run down Manton Avenue in the rain. It sounds loud and quick like a machine gun. I am not a gun, but sometimes I feel like a bullet. Fast, unstoppable, deadly. I used to think I could outrun a bullet when I was a child, and I still believed in things I couldn't see, like the truth, love, and forgiveness. Today I believe in only the things I can feel: hunger, pain, my beating heart. I don't remember most of my childhood. I got a few memories from when my mother was alive, but not as many as I should. Only a few are clear. The rest are faint and jumbled, like the lines of a long and complicated joke that ends without a punchline, or that never ends. I see flashes all the time, real quick like a movie preview. They jump into my head and jump out quick as they came. I try to control them, but I can't. They're not mine. They come so often they don't belong to me. It's like I'm watching TV without the sound, like I'm remembering somebody else's life. There's a kid in most of them, me, I guess, but I don't recognize her. I try not to look her in the eyes. There's a man with her, or sometimes a boy, but he is always someone she knows. He looks kind, but he is not kind. Sometimes he smiles at the girl, but she never smiles back. She is always trying to escape, or looking for a place to hide. When the rain stops and darkness comes, I'm still running. My baby girl is asleep in my arms, her breath a whisper on my neck. The high gone, she's now too much to carry. My arms and legs burn. I cut through the parking lot behind Atlantic Mills, hoping to lose the cops before my legs give out. I've been running my whole life, either to people or away from them, and I don't really know where to go anymore. All the streets look the same, and I wonder if I'm lost. Not sure it matters as long as I keep moving. All roads got to end somewhere. I run up an alleyway where 2 men are working under the hood of an old Buick. The car looks familiar, but they don't. My legs continue to move purely on instinct. I hear music from inside the car, the radio playing a Spanish song about a bird that follows a balloon all the way to the sun. The old man whistles the tune, and the younger one sings so softly I can't even tell if he knows the words. They don't stop to look up as I sprint past them, as if I'm so fast they can't see me, as if I'm invisible. All right, I'll stop there. That's the end of the first chapter.
Great. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about This Side of Providence yet, how would you describe your new novel?
I would say that this is a family story. It's about a family struggling to stay together after the mother gets arrested for drugs. So that's the plot. But it's really about addiction and motherhood and what happens when the two overlap. The initial question that I asked myself before writing the novel was, can an addict be a good mother? And it was a question that sort of kept resonating in my mind. And as I started to try to answer it, I heard of the story kind of evolving through all the different characters. In other words, from the mother herself, from the children, from one of the children's teachers, from people in the community. And so that's how it kind of developed, that I realized I want to tell this story, but I don't want to just tell the mother's story. I don't want to just tell it from one point of view. I want to tell what happens as the larger story, like what happens to the whole family. And so that's when I decided to do it in the multiple narrators and using those multiple voices. And to me, that's really an important part of the book, is that it is, I've heard people refer to it as a kaleidoscope. I'm really trying to circle around this situation and this problem from everybody's point of view and tell, a broader story, but definitely at the heart, it's a story of a family.
Gotcha. So how did you decide on the setting for the novel of Providence, Rhode Island?
The setting came as part of the story. I grew up in Providence, and I had left and then moved back there. And when I came back in my 20s, I was working in social services, and I was working in a different part of town than I had lived in. And so, I'd gone to school and grown up on one side of town, and now I was on the other side of town, sort of like, quote unquote, the other side of the tracks. And I was very influenced by living in the neighborhood and the people and the voices that I heard. And I didn't feel like I saw those stories represented in a lot of the literary fiction that I was reading and that I had been taught. And I definitely felt like it was a compelling story. Some of the folks that I worked with, I actually ran a needle exchange for several years and worked with at-risk teenagers and homeless and runaways. And, I just sort of saw life from, like I said, the other side of Providence. And I definitely, felt inspired by the history of Providence. Providence is the capital city of the smallest state in our country, and it's one of the oldest. It's hundreds of years old. And it has, if you either haven't heard of it or you think of it as something, like colonial and something ancient, and you think of the good colleges that are there and, that kind of thing. And I wanted to show a different side, folks that I felt like were sort of on the fringe and forgotten about and not in history books and not talked about. And so, I really was telling the story of a community that I knew well and a place that, where I lived and had seen and had been there, long enough to see it change. And I wanted to sort of capture some of that change in the city.
Sure. I know that you said that you were working in social services. Were you also writing at the time?
I was, yes. I was actually working on my first novel at the time, and which has nothing to do with Providence. It's set mostly in rural Minnesota, where I spent my summers with my mom. Grew up on a farm in Minnesota, and I realized then that I would probably write about what was going on at the time, but I knew I couldn't. I needed more separation from it. So I would occasionally take notes and kind of impressions of things, and when I talked to different people, I would, write down snippets of dialogue and just things that I had seen, and I just put it in a notebook and put it away. And I realized very early that I tend to be one of those writers who can't write about something while it's happening. Especially when I'm thinking of a novel form, I need a bit of distance, not only distance of time, but actually geography. And so, when I was living in Providence, I wrote this book about Minnesota. Then I took all those impressions. I moved back to California to write this book about Providence. And so I seem to kind of need that kind of distance, like a psychic distance and just time and space. And so yeah, that's I was definitely writing on the side for all those years, but not this novel.
Right. So was there a moment when you made the decision to switch from social services to pursuing writing as a career, or what was that evolution for you?
I definitely just felt I had to have a day job, just because of, how I was raised and I needed to pay the rent. And so
Sure.
I was working and I cared a lot about that work. I definitely felt early on like, oh, as a writer, it's like I'm going to have to do something else. And I wanted to be inspired too. I didn't want to just sit around and just write about myself and, my childhood my whole life. And so as I was experiencing these different things, I was like, I need more stories, and that to me was really important because it helped open me up to writing beyond just my story, quote unquote. My first novel is semi-autobiographical. And I think for some people that's typical. Your first novel ends up being your own story or parts of your story and your childhood. And it was for me. And that was great because I needed to feel comfortable about the subject matter and things that I had lived. And I used, a first person narration of a young girl that was very similar to me in terms of temperament and experience. And so I felt like I could access it. But after I'd done that, I wanted to branch out more and I wanted to tell other people's stories. And I knew I needed to live a life. I needed to know people and know of experiences beyond myself. So I was actually happy to work on other things, especially since I knew that, in telling, in sort of like being involved in other communities and other people's stories, I could really get outside of my head and get outside of like, quote unquote, my life and my experience and open it up and tell and talk about, things that have happened to other people, but hopefully with a sense of authenticity in terms of the voice and the characters. Sure. And I definitely wanted to be a full-time writer the whole time. It was an aspiration. I wanted to be published, but I just had to work it around my schedule. I wrote late at night. I wrote in the mornings. I just sort of figured out how to do it on the side and really feel like I was committing to it. Everybody that I worked with knew I was writing, but it was kind of like this cute thing. They just would see me. And at the time, I had these notebooks. I was always like jotting things down and even clients and people would be like, girl, what are you writing in that notebook? What are you always writing? You always, and they would laugh about it. And I would talk to them. I would say, I'm not a journalist, don't worry. I'm not writing a report on you, but I'm a writer, and I want to be able to, sort of, I don't want to miss anything. So when I heard snippets of stories and things, I wanted to kind of jot it down. And I have to say, I was very, got a lot of support, the people that I worked with, they were encouraging, and they let me take some time off of some different jobs when I got into residencies and artist colonies. And that was, so important to that beginning time in my career of having solid time to write outside of, the 9-to-5 job.
Sure. Well, I know you've written for the screen. How different was that for you to do, as opposed to writing a novel or short stories?
I found the process quite different, but equally sort of engaging and interesting. And I think there's, several sides of my personality. And when I want to, be the total boss and go in and sort of do whatever, that's, write a novel, write a short story. And when you want to collaborate, to work on a play or a script is a natural form of collaboration because so many people are involved in the process, from original idea all the way to, putting it up or filming it, of course. And I felt like I liked that. I liked having both sides. There are the times and the stories that I want to tell where I want to be able to just go into a room by myself for hours and explore a certain world. And then there's times when I wanted to get feedback and I wanted to kind of have more conversations about things and share with people. So I was able to enjoy both processes, but they are quite different. It's like you feel you can slow things down so much in fiction and really open up. In paragraphs, you sort of open up the scene and sort of look around and try to remember every detail, sensory observations, and, what does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? What do they say? It's like all these different elements of how to paint the picture. And in scripts, it's the opposite, where you're just like, what is the one thing I want to lead with? I want the dialogue, what are these images? And it's very clean and neat, and you're sort of pulling everything away that's unnecessary. And the interesting thing I have to say after doing both for a while now is that I've learned something about my fiction writing, and my prose, I think, has changed a bit through writing some of the scripts because, it definitely forces you to think about what's the point, like what's the point of this scene. And I know, I like the sound of words. I like language, and, I sort of like the rhythm of it. And sometimes I can just get carried away into, oh, it sounds so pretty. And I'm just writing, line after line. And then I'm like, but wait a minute, like, what is the whole point of this scene? Like, I've gotten totally off track. And, writing about the flowers is not moving the plot forward. And working in scripts has actually helped me with that, because it forces you to focus. It forces you to think about what the objective of the scene is and what needs to happen. And it sort of helps you with pacing of the narrative. And it's interesting, because when I go back to fiction after that, I'm much more aware of, moving the story along and how to, mess with time. Sometimes I manipulate time in stories where I'm going backward and forwards, and, big jumps between characters and situations. And it sort of inspired me to do that more in my fiction. Obviously I'm using multiple narrators in This Side of Providence, which is similar to how, you're cutting between scenes and sort of jumping across town, and a lot of things that we would see in TV or movies. And we just keep going with it. As a viewer, we're used to it. We have a certain sophistication. And I think I'm noticing as a reader more and more books where people don't just tell a straight linear narrative. They move around in time, they move between characters and voices. And I like that as a reader. And I certainly, like that as a writer, because it gives you more freedom. It gives you more opportunities. And I hope I've, done it well. I mean, I certainly was committed to telling a fuller story, one that, I felt like could reflect what I'd actually seen. And it made it interesting to me. I actually also adapted this book into a TV pilot. So I actually only had to take the first 2 chapters and make that like the opening episode of what the show would be. And it was fascinating, because I had to move some of the things that happened later in the book up into the first episode, because everybody says, when you're writing a TV show, you have to start in that first episode with kind of all the main conflicts, all the main characters, so we know what the series is going to be about. And in doing that, I had to invent a few new scenes that either don't exist in the book or wouldn't take place right at the beginning. And I actually learned something about my characters, even though when I was doing it, I had already written and completed the novel. It was like I was forced to look at the bigger story. And in doing that, I really found out a few things about the characters. So I always tell my students that it's amazing that going between genres, even with the same material, with the same story and same subject matter, you can learn something and kind of force yourself to be creative or to imagine something in a different setting. And I found that really powerful. I think sometimes people have a snobbery with scripts versus prose, and people sort of think, oh, you're selling out if you start writing for film or TV after writing novels. And I don't feel that way at all. And in fact, I felt like I actually learned something about my own craft, about my process in writing, and like I said, about my actual characters by putting them in different situations and by being forced to think about scenes and how the plot is unfolding in a different way, and not just relying so much on the voice, the narrative voice that you have in fiction, but on actually like the images, and the visual storytelling. And I found it really inspiring and exciting. So I'm always one to suggest that people work in different mediums and not feel limited to, only what you've had experience in or only, what you might feel comfortable in right now, because you never know what you could learn about yourself as a writer or about your actual stories by putting them in different mediums.
That's great. Well, what advice would you have for aspiring writers who might be listening and are interested in writing their own novels or short stories?
I mean, my first advice is to just get it done by sitting down, daily if you can, but at least several times a week, and getting into your stories. I know for me, when I did have full-time jobs, that had nothing to do with writing, and also being a parent, it was very hard to find that time. And so what I started to do is wake up early. I always felt like if I woke up first, then I'm ahead of the game. And when you get up at 5 a.m, nobody's looking for you. Whereas if you wake up because your kid is sitting on your face in bed, then you're already behind the game. And so I really felt like when I started to set my alarm at 5 a.m. and get up and go into my world of, my fictional world every day, first thing, it felt like I was really committing to myself and my passion first, and then you don't have the excuse of running out of time, or, being too busy or being distracted. And I also, I created that time as like a sacred time. So I didn't get my phone. I didn't look at texts or emails. I didn't read the newspaper. Like, I just really would get up and go right into the work. And giving yourself that commitment every day, and getting kind of into this fictional world that you've created. It's kind of like a dream. It's like you've dreamed this thing, and the more time you spend in it, the more real it becomes to you. And only when it's real to you can you convey it to others, to your readers, as being equally real and authentic. So for me, that was the big difference. When I was younger, I used to write just when I had inspiration, quote unquote. And in order to kind of make it become more of a job, I needed a practice around that. And I needed to feel like, hey, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if I feel good. It doesn't matter if I feel particularly moved. I need to just, get up and get into it. And if you show up every day like that, it's amazing. It's like your brain becomes like a muscle. It'd be like getting up to exercise every day, And at first you're sore and you dread it. But then when you get in the rhythm of doing it, it becomes more and more natural. And it's actually something you look forward to. And I would notice that it's almost like my mind had saved all the impressions throughout the previous day. And when I would sit down, all of a sudden they would all come right there. It's like they were waiting for me, and they sort of started to understand, oh, okay, this is what she's doing now. And so all those little bits of inspiration that I might have, sat down at midnight when I was 20, and I could stay up, until the sun rose. Now I would save them throughout the day and not even think about it. It's like my subconscious was doing that kind of work for me. And then when I would, get up at 5 and open the notebook or open the computer, it would all sort of come tumbling out of me. And I felt like that was a big change in me, in my process, and really solidifying this sense of like, oh, I can do this. And if I keep showing up for it, and keep writing a couple pages every day, next thing you know, you have 300 pages. And at the beginning, that's what I needed. I didn't know that I could write such a long story. I didn't know that I could sustain a single narrative, after only having written, 15-page, short stories or something prior to writing my first novel. And I needed the encouragement and the confidence that came from just being able to amass that many pages. And then obviously, spending other time later going back and revising and rewriting. But I really think at the beginning, just to give yourself the time to get into the story, repeatedly, day after day, is really the thing that me the most.
Great. I'm curious, when you sit down to write, are there ever days that you need to do something to jumpstart the process? Or if you follow what you're saying, that it's usually, easy for you to kind of get into that dream state?
No, it's not always easy. It's like I would force myself to do it. And there are times when it's harder. And I would say, some of the tricks I use, which, I think are fairly common, I would reread, what I did the day before. And a lot of times that would help me get into it. And I've also always been the type of person who's been inspired by other forms of art. So whether it's listening to music, whether it's reading poetry, a lot of times helps me getting into different voices. Sometimes just looking at art, looking at paintings or photographs, especially if I'm trying to access a world or characters that are different from myself in any significant way, then I always find like going into another art form, it ends up sort of opening my imagination in a certain way. Like if I'm writing from a male point of view, or, an older person or a younger person, when I start to look at different images, I had a whole series where I would just look at these still photographs from years ago, like from the 50s and 60s, and a lot of black and white images, and something about it, just sort of the stark beauty of these images and seeing people and trying to imagine a different time. It helped me. I wasn't even writing a period piece. That would make even more sense if you were doing something like that. But for some reason, it helped me see these different people and these different lives, and really sort of start to imagine, like, after the photograph was taken, what now? Where do they go now? What was their life like? And that helped me in my scenes. Just think about, here I am writing scenes about, that I have to invent, like what next? What's happening now? What's the next thing I want to know about? What am I curious about? And that asking those questions ends up motivating me. And I would say questions are another thing that sometimes, you have a lot of pressure as a writer because you feel like you're answering the questions, and that's what your book is about. It's all these answers you have to give and these like things you need to know. And if I feel like I don't know, then I would be like, well, what are the questions? What do I want to know? And sometimes I would write just that, questions about what should come next, questions that the characters are thinking of each other. Why did she do this? Why does he want that? And some days I might just write those questions and not even necessarily have the answers right away, or the answers might not even become part of the actual text of the story, but something happens in the asking. And then I feel like my subconscious starts to work on that. And then it ends up showing up in some other thing that I write, later. I'm like, oh yeah, I never really answered that question, but I ended up writing this whole scene that in one way is perhaps an answer to that, unasked question that isn't in the story, but that I had asked myself on one of those tougher days when it wasn't just flowing out of me.
Sure. So are there books and authors that inspire you in your own writing journey?
Oh, definitely. I mean, like most writers, I was a serious reader as a kid, and I think everything from classics to, books I read as a kid. I mean, as a kid, I read the, Little House on the Prairie series that I loved. And I also read the Great Brain series by John Fitzgerald, which was, took place like 100 years ago in Utah. It had nothing to do with my life, but I was so inspired as a kid by those things, all the way up through, Faulkner. I mean, James Baldwin are, two big, those are two of my favorite writers, in terms of just voice and structure. And I don't write a lot of short stories, but I love the short story writer, Andre Dubus.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's just fantastic. And in a lot of his short stories, they read as if they're novels. I mean, It's like he packs in a life. And so for my stories, but also for novels, I look to him a lot of times, and I'll read just one of his short stories in exactly one of those moments you were just asking about where I felt stuck. And I just feel inspired by what he manages to pack into, 10 or 15 pages. So, and I'm always reading. I mean, I try to read contemporary folks too. Like in the last year, I read a couple novels that came out that I really liked. Lauren Groff, Fates and Furies is a novel I really enjoyed this year. And Girl Through Glass by Sari Wilson, I just saw read at AWP. It was great. And I also read a lot of poetry. I think I was raised by a poet. My father was a poet. And because of that, I think I always sort of veer over into poetry. And there's a poetry collection that came out last year by Ada Limon called Bright Dead Things that I just love and I think is gorgeous. And I also read a memoir by a poet, Elizabeth Alexander, I read last year that I loved, called The Light of the World, I believe. And so, yeah, I read everything. I mean, I read a lot of fiction, but when I'm writing fiction, I don't often read a novel while I'm currently writing, so because I don't want my voice to be affected by that one, but I end up, I'll read biography then of, a writer or an artist, or I'll read the poetry then, or, I'll read plays, so I definitely am always reading something, but I do notice that when I'm actively writing that first draft of a novel, I'll put away novels for that time. That's something that I've noticed about my own reading and writing process.
Gotcha. So are you working on another novel now?
I am. I actually, I finished the first draft a year ago, and then I got back into a big sort of, front to back revision, and I'm now, I'd say, in the third draft, and I feel like it's really coming together. I mean, it feels close to being done, and it's exciting. I wanted to be working on the next thing before getting into the publishing realm of the first one. So, because it can be distracting, and I didn't want there to be a lull. So this past year, I've definitely had to do a lot of last minute things, getting This Side of Providence together, and having conversations with my publishers about the cover, and last minute edits and all that stuff. But I kept doing that and then going back to my manuscript. And in the manuscript form, it's also beautiful and perfect if you haven't gotten, you haven't sort of had to face the real world with it yet. And so I actually, unlike some people maybe who kind of want to just be done, I've really begun to like the process. And I like that freedom when I'm still creating it. And I feel like, I haven't done anything wrong. Nobody's criticized it yet. And it's still sort of evolving, and it feels like it can be anything. And so I'm in a good place with it now, and I'm eager to get back to it. I've been doing some publicity stuff for This Side of Providence, so I've taken some time off these last weeks, and I miss it. The characters become kind of like family to me. It's kind of like going to see my cousins in Minnesota when I haven't seen them for a while. I miss them, and I want to kind of get back in the room with them and catch up with them and hear their stories. So I'm definitely eager to get back to it.
Great. Well, we've been speaking with Rachel Harper, author of the new novel, This Side of Providence. The novel is available in bookstores now, so go buy a copy. And Rachel, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really had fun.
Great.
Don't wait to put an end to junk sleep. Shop Mattress Firm's Black Friday sale and wake up a better you. Save up to $500 when you get a king bed for the price of a queen or a queen for a twin. Plus, get a free adjustable base with qualifying Sealy purchase up to a $499 value. Or shop Tempur-Pedic, the most highly recommended bed in America, and get a $300 instant gift good towards sleep accessories. Unjunk your sleep, only at Mattress Firm. Offer valid with qualifying purchase. Restrictions apply. See details at mattressfirm.com.
It's Black Friday now at JCPenney. Starting Friday, shop thousands of Black Friday deals across the store while they last. Our Yes Please diamonds are only $19.99 each. Bundle up the family in jackets under $25. Plus, update with cookware and cutlery, now $9.99 each after $10 mail-in rebate. These deals are yours for the gifting. Happy Black Friday, JCPenney. Offers valid on select items 11/19 through 11/21. Conditions and exclusions apply. See store or jcp.com for details.